Hey, all you lovely people. What are you guys doing tonight? um, before we get started, just for those of you who've never seen Stephen Raspa, yeah, as I've said to a few of you, probably the majority of the people in this room are in this slideshow somewhere. There's Lloyd right there. I know. Well, I'm going to just looking for a picture of you, Hal. That's right. Yeah. No, that's does that look like? Was that like last week? Is that what you're asking? Yeah. This was from Batman the TV show, the play. Wah, wah, wah. These are a few photos actually from here, including folks that have moved variously to another country, New York City and the East Bay. Here's our host, Foggy. Here's our host, Clear. Let's give a round of applause for Scott. Celebrating 15 years and the end of this. This is no longer going to be an indoor space as of like a week from now, right? Is that when? That's right. Yeah. We're gonna bring Scott up on stage a little bit later so we can hear about the future projects, and where the energy and momentum, the learnings from this space are going to go next. My name's Mikl M. I know all of you, I'm pretty sure. Hi. You are an amazing group of people, which is kind of exactly what I wanted. I wanted to be able to say, well, let's do a couple quick, what do they call them? We're gonna do a couple quick surveys here. How many people have performed in this space? Have been on this stage or another stage here? Okay. In this building, because there are multiple things. That includes radio stations. If you happen to have been on a radio station that was based here, if such a thing were to have occurred. Am I allowed to ask if you've lived in this? I'm not going to even do that. Just plausible deniability. This, by the way, is Proust Cafe, for those of you who knew the short run of Proust Cafe. And how many of you have lived in a warehouse? Checking our demographics here. How many of you, keep your hand up if you are currently living in a warehouse or another untraditional space? Because I want Lloyd to be able to raise it. Lloyd, is it a junkyard right now? How many of you have ever worked the door? Where's Kevin? Because he was working the door tonight. Let's have a big round of applause for the paying guest who also worked the door on demand. That's the kind of intimate show that you're at tonight. By the way, I think you can turn my mic down a little bit because I'm going to get all up to it. And yeah, cool. I mean, I don't know. You tell me, but I bet they can still hear me. So we're going to talk tonight. I'm going to talk tonight for a bit, and then you'll have a chance to talk tonight too, if you'd like, about these untraditional places, why we can't just, do our arts in museums and properly licensed galleries or what have you, university settings. Why do we need these things? Unlike a lot of situations when people talk to you from a microphone, I'm not actually looking to tell you anything. I'm not going to claim that I know the truth. I know a bunch of things. I know a bunch of facts. I've seen a bunch of stuff. But I'd rather start conversations and open up more questions than say, you're going to understand at the end of this. We're going to fix anything. We're going to defeat capitalism or petty-minded city bureaucrats. None of those things are going to happen. That I can promise you. But what I want, what I know. I would have charged more at the door if, and we'd be serving a. I mean, this is a premium product of a sort. Um, so before I get started, a couple notes about the format, about what is going to happen here, and then I want to bring up a very special guest to say a few words. But um, the there's a performer, a poet, a thinker, a guy named David Anton, who's not super well known, but was a big influence on me. I've got one of his books here amongst my small library. This is David Anton. He did things called talk poems, and no one else has really done them a lot. I guess a couple other people have, but I've been looking to start this form up and do my own take on it. And what is a talk poem? Well, he got sick of bringing his poems that had already been created, and now that's not. I should just say that's not a commentary on how exciting this is. That's the sound the door makes. So if somebody can just help with the door, when we hear those crickets, feel free to pitch in. Thanks, Kevin. You rule. So at any rate, what he would do with these talk poems is he had an idea of something he wanted to talk about, and he came to a space and he had it in mind, and it wasn't scripted. It was sort of, I think, rehearsed in that he'd sort of gone through what he might talk about. But it's really the intersection of three things. One, his idea of what he wants to talk about. Two, what's happening that day, what's happening that moment in time. And three, who's in the room, what's the occasion like, who are the people. And so one of the things I want to do, and why I start with the slides on the wall, is because you're part of this too. And whether I'm talking to you, or eventually, I think, hopefully a few of you will say something from the stage if you're so inclined. It's a moment where it's a night and a talk when we're all going to walk through this area of ideas about art in strange places and why we feel it needs to keep happening. If we do, we do, right? And so none of this is rehearsed. Well, it's rehearsed. None of it is scripted. I really want to be honest. I don't want to put myself, like I said, I don't want to make any promises about solving anything, but hopefully it's going to be a journey we're all going to enjoy. I have asked a good friend of mine who I've collaborated with many times over the years to read something for you tonight. And I'm honored that he said yes. Please, I'd like to welcome Hal Robbins to the stage. It is National Poetry Month, and I thought beginning with a particular poem would be a good choice. Hal, I'm going to let you have this mic so that you are fully lit. I mean, you know what I mean.
Esta Noche by Mark Doty. In a dress with a black tulip's sheen, La Fabulosa Lola enters late, mounts the stairs to the plywood platform, and begs whoever runs the wobbling spot to turn the lights down to something flattering. When they halo her with a petal-toned gel, she sets to haranguing, shifting in and out of two languages like gowns or genders, to please have a little respect for the girls, flashing the one entrancing an unavoidable gap in the center of her upper teeth. And when the cellophane drop goes black, a new spot coronas her in a wig fit for the end of a century, and she tosses back her hair, risky gesture, and raises her arms like a widow in a blood tragedy, all will and black lace, and lip syncs you and me against the world. She's a man you wouldn't look twice at in street clothes, 200 pounds of hard living, the gap in her smile sadly narrative, but she's a monument in the mysterious permission of the dress. This is Esta Noche, a Latin drag bar in the Mission. Its black door a gap in the face of a battered wall. All over the neighborhood, storefront windows show all night shrined hats and gloves, wedding dresses, first communions frothing lace, gowns of perfection and commencement, fixed promises glowing. In the dress, the color of the spaces between street lamps, Lola stands unassailable. The dress in which she is, in the largest sense, fabulous. A lesson, a criticism and colossus of gender, all fire and irony. Her spine's perfectly erect, only her fluid hands moving and her head turned slightly to one side. She hosts the pageant Wednesdays and Saturdays, and men come in from the streets, the trains, and the repair shops, lean together to rank the artifice of the awkward or lovely. Lola welcomes onto the stage. Victoria, Elena, Francie, lame pumps and stockings, and always the rippling night pulled down over broad shoulders and flounced around the hips, liquid, the black silk of Esta Noche, proving that perfection and beauty are so alien they almost never touch. Tonight, she says, put it on. The costume is license and calling. She says you could wear the whole damn black sky and all its spangles. It's the only night we have to stand on. Put it on. It's the only thing we have to wear.
So that was I'm going to go ahead and we can bring down the projection. I think I don't need it for this rather than Harry Howler's embarrassed enough that he's been on screen this long. Is it something that I need to turn off? Does it matter? I can do it from here. Oh, let's see if. Oops. Wow. Yeah. Okay. So I'll just do this. Ha. Yes. All right. All right. More Peter Field later. So why did I ask Hal to read that poem? Well, Esta Noche is no longer there. Esta Noche used to be on 16th Street between Valencia and Mission. And it was one of the things that I knew about before I moved to San Francisco. And I moved out here in 1995 from Richmond, Virginia. I saw that poet Mark Doty read at the university, VCU University. It's kind of an art school that I think is maybe more of a business school these days. I haven't been back in a bit. And his book out at the time was called My Alexandria. He had a handful of poems about San Francisco, and they were amazing. And I got to see him read. And so the first, I have realized in retrospect the collection of images and examples I had of what San Francisco was before I moved here, and interestingly, that was one of them. And it's a different community than what's at the center of my life, but clearly a community that's also endangered, that had a haven in very much an area that was geographically important to it, as the Mission was a very Latin neighborhood. So I thought it was as that celebration of the special thing that can happen in a place, in an enclosed space, an indoor place, whether that's a bar or a club or a home or a warehouse gallery with a disco ball. these are shelters. These are petri dishes. These are places where people feel safe, where people can extend themselves, do something like I am, a little bit stepping out on a high dive, not sure exactly what's coming next. And yeah, so I thought it was fitting. Esta noche, so this night, so the beginning of the title of this event was This Night. And so it says, this is a night, this is a place, this is an occasion we've created. And as I mentioned earlier, we're going to explore some things and walk through some things today. I have some stories I have in mind to tell you. I have some stories that are connected to some of the folks in the audience. The nature of this form that I'm playing with right now, and I appreciate you all being here to be a part of, is that I have more stories than I'm going to be able to tell. And I know that I'm going to have to make choices and navigate between them. There are lots of, as any conversation, any flowing of the mind, there are a lot of paths that can be made through it. So I'm going to decide in real time as we go. And I'm going to try and take both your reaction, again, what it feels like in this place. The occasion that we're in tonight is, this is the, I've talked to a lot of you here where this is your first time in this space. And this is probably, Scott, this is probably my fifth or sixth time. Well, actually, no, that's because I've been here. This is my third time in the last week. But before that, it's probably somewhere between 5 or 8 times in the 15 years that you've been around here. And my apologies that I've been in here. I've been to a radio station under this larger dome a few times. I've been to a few events in this space. This space itself is part of this group of buildings, and Scott can tell you more of the history of it, and I encourage you to hang out and hear more from Scott Kuiper, our host tonight, about that. There have been a couple hundred people who have had in corporate and various ways have had residence here. This was a kind of a factory of a sort, or assembly line for a handcrafted for a wooden tie company very recently. And Scott has been the kind of the captain of the ship, the master tenant, or well, there are various things. You should ask him about some of the stories because there are some amazing ones. But a lot of life has come through here, a lot of expression. And as I said, a lot of you, it's the first time you've been here. This space will be under Scott's guidance for less than a week from right now. And I'm honored, and this all came together pretty quickly, where Scott had this moment open, and I said, well, I've been wanting to talk about some of these things, and you created this opportunity for that. And what I'm thinking about is, why do we make these ephemeral spaces, knowing that all the odds are against us in a lot of ways, in terms of city ordinances, in terms of more capitalist structures that are asking for rents and insurances and so forth. And I've been thinking back through the history that I know that I've participated in, both here and elsewhere. So that's where some of these stories are going to come from. So if I can, I'm going to take you back to Virginia, which is where, as I mentioned, I moved here in the mid-90s. And I was living in Richmond, Virginia, which is a town I'd grown up in. Now, as far as a creative scene, I don't know how many, this is an interesting survey question. How many of you are native San Franciscans? 1.5, 2, 3. Okay, we got a smattering. This is a pretty high percentage, I think, for a room in San Francisco, actually, and or larger Bay Area. So some of you folks are from this area. It's an amazing area. How many of you are from a smaller city or a smaller town. One of the, yeah. So I grew up in Richmond, Virginia. Richmond, Virginia is the kind of place where, well, the way I always describe it is, um, if you're a poet or a sculptor or a filmmaker in Richmond, Virginia, you have to know the sculptors and the poets and the filmmakers and the punk bands and the hippies. You need to know everyone who's different, because you can't really do a show. You can't really show your work. You won't get critical mass unless you get all of these people that are different together. And that's kind of an amazing thing. I mean, you feel like a reject from this culture that is more dominant and more normal. You probably are frustrated by the way the political winds blow and regulations, local regulations, so forth go. But there is a solidarity in being different. And as I mentioned, Richmond's a town where there's this art school, VCU, Virginia Commonwealth University. And the most interesting people and the most interesting work around an art school are always the people who dropped out, right? Or maybe some of the people who graduated and just hung around and never did anything else. But they're ensconced often in buildings, in homes. Sometimes they're warehouses, but sometimes they're just houses, right? These are houses with names. The greenhouse, the planetarium, they have these names. There are parties there. There are people, the people that are on the lease have not lived there for a decade, but they have their own kind of community. They have, in the big business world, they would call it the brand of this house. You know what happens at the greenhouse. Oh, they kind of have crazy parties. And this one guy does these weird sculptures and he's always hanging them from the ceiling. They do more acid at the planetarium, et cetera, right? And so Richmond had this scene. It's one of the things I'm most thankful for was being a part of that scene. I wasn't part of that scene initially. I lived in several different places in Richmond growing up, different areas of town, more suburban, a lot of them. And when I came back from college, I moved into the downtown area, which is where all this stuff was going on. And if you know any creative products out of Richmond, you may know one that you don't actually associate with it, which is Gwar. So Gwar, the band Gwar is, and everyone thinks Gwar is from outer space. So it's not really helping in terms of the brand of the city and the punk scene. If you are a punk nerd and know more about hardcore, there's some bands like Death Piggy that are like legendary early hardcore bands that are from. So there's actually a great tradition of punk rock from the town, and there's a great scene there. More recently, there's a lot of rap that's come out of there. In a way, if you haven't been to Richmond and you want a little helper to it, it's kind of like a small Atlanta. It's this southern city, the southern metropolis, and it's funny. It's a funny town. Like lots of companies, for some reason, I don't know, they have good tax laws are there or something. A lot of companies have their headquarters in Richmond for some reason. Now, I was absolutely not cool enough to go to Gwar concerts when I was in high school. I want to be really clear. Now, I grew up. I graduated high school in '88, and so when I went downtown, largely from a suburban kind of thing. I wasn't cool enough. My parents were a pain in the ass, whatever. I didn't exactly get to go and explore the music scene, but I would sometimes go to this club called Rockets, and Rockets was the club where the touring bands, the smaller touring bands, not the bigger arena type of things, but so bands like Fishbone and Butthole Surfers and from the other side of the pond, the Mighty Lemon Drops would tour and would play at this club called Rockets downtown. Broad Street. I forget the cross street right now, but at any rate, so Rockets was this club, and it was well established. I think it went through a couple different names. And when you were at Rockets and you were a nerdy, I mean, this is before nerdy was cool, before nerdy became, what was sort of this weird nerd coolness that we live in today. We're sitting there, and everybody in front of you is wearing leather jackets, and they all are probably 40. I mean, they're all probably 26, but like, it's like they all see him. I'm this kid, this teenager, and they're yelling at somebody across the street in like the studio at the top of the other building. That was Guar. That was where Guar's studio was. So Guar is one of these bands, and there are actually a handful of them. It's a pretty interesting model where you've got like 6 musicians and like 25 people in the art department building costumes and props and ejaculating machines. It's really kind of, this is the warehouse Game of Thrones, really, is what Guar, if you haven't, with a little bit of Gallagher mixed in. But yeah, so that was Guar. And as an aside, if you aren't, you may have heard of the band The Tubes from here. The Tubes are actually, I've realized, kind of the prototype of Guar. And I know this because on YouTube, you can find some amazing videos of old Tube shows. And it was the same thing. They had a huge art department, and they were doing shows at Bimbos and at, all kinds of big venues around town. And they had these elaborate costumes and everything. It's really worth checking out. I only heard about the Tubes through their like early MTV video, which was called "She's a Beauty" and was a real crappy pop song. But look for White Punks on Dope, and you'll hear the other side of the Tubes. So that's your retro music tip for the night. Well, the first one anyway. So fast forward now to past my awkward college or high school years to my post-college years back in that neighborhood, living around there at that time. It's actually before I lived a block away, but people who I'd later know lived there. And a band called Murphy's Law was coming to town. They were coming to play at Rockets, and it was like a ska punk kind of thing. They were running late. There was a big crowd for them. Virginia is one of these places with pretty draconian ABC laws, so there was no fucking around. The band was late. The club's like, this band is not going to play. They're not going to play. Sold out show. Everybody's bummed. These 4 guys who are at the show, like, well, you can come play at our practice space. So they lived at a warehouse up the alley, a half block away, and they brought Murphy's Law, the band, and they brought however many people had hung out to try and see them. They had a freight elevator, so they'd actually take all their equipment down there. So they lived on the top floor. The ground floor was pretty desolate of the street level floor. And in the basement, they had like 6 bands that were related to people that played there. In this warehouse they rented for $600 on Broad Street in Richmond, Virginia. And this is probably about 92, 93. And Murphy's Law, as legend has it, comes in and play like 2.5 hours and only pause to do bong hits. And, it's like the best show of the tour and everything. And it clicked something for these guys that they'd been thinking about for a while. And they said, yeah, we're going to turn this into a venue. So a good friend of mine, David Sanchez, who lived here for a little bit later on, he was a painter. I think he'd graduated from VCU at that time. And he set to work redoing the floors, painting the whole thing up. And they made a venue which became known as Citizen Gallery. I moved in probably about 3-4 months after that. So Citizen Gallery was, I said already that, you'd be handing around flyers because you've got a poetry reading at this bar or whatever, and you'd get like 20 people to come or something maybe. The punk bands were really what brought people out. There's a band called, I'm just going to say a couple names in case people heard them. There's a band called Keepone that made a little bit of a splash. Of course, the band Avail, it's kind of a big deal and has its own scene. And so some of those bands, like that would be the really big draw in the area. And what we did eventually at Citizen Gallery was we paired the punk bands with the art opening. So we would do an art opening, and we would have bands play in the basement. And it was amazing. It brought the whole thing together because a lot of the bands were actually painters too, or what have you. And you could really feel something special happening in this scene because you didn't have to like, you could be exposed. You could go there because you were going to a punk show, but you could find that you liked art in the midst of it. And we found other ways to do this, mixing in again film and poetry and other things. So it was a kind of a magical thing. And I think we lasted in total about 9 months. And I'm trying to remember who was on the bill. I looked for some of the materials from this, but it was February or March night. I think it was maybe Ho's Got Cable, local favorites, that were headlining. And all of a sudden, all these people start rushing in the doors with badges. And it turns out there's a guy, there was, I shit you not, an undercover cop who'd come like 4 or 5 times. Just like he always looked kind of weird and out of place. He had like a walrus mustache and he was wearing a jean jacket. And it's like, are you really okay? And so they proceeded to kick us all out that night, not just to shut down the party, but they said, this isn't zoned residential. You all have to leave now. It was starting to snow that night. It was kind of the first snow of the year. And so we all had to find a new place to live and schlep whatever of our stuff we could, just on the fly. And we would find out later there were like 9 city departments involved. The firearms people, the drug, they're like, are they selling drugs there, whatever. So there's a lot of paranoia about what could be happening in this strange underground thing. We were again, it was like 7 of us living there. We were paying $600 a month. This big 3-4 thing. The ground floor was basically like a there theoretically there was a kitchen there, but it was more like an appliance graveyard. And it was literally, those of you who've lived in warehouses may know this phenomenon. It was colder inside the building somehow than outside. I remember one time we saved up all our money. We're all working at grocery stores and restaurants, and and we saved up all our money. And we went to Lowe's and we bought a heater. And we were like this, so it's like this heater droid. It's like yay high. And it was like this epic thing. It's like the monolith in 2001: A Space Odyssey. So I was like, oh my God, I brought it home. They brought it home. And we turned it on. We're all just like, our lives are so much fucking better now. We turned it on and it's like, and it was like warm about 2.5 feet. And it was just like, fuck you. So we weren't necessarily the brightest, but we had a lot of love. And I guess I want to tell that story to say, for one thing, to have perspective on the fact that this happens everywhere. And in some ways, it's easier because it was a cheaper startup cost. Obviously, $600 warehouses are not lining any part of Oakland, let alone San Francisco. But it also was harder. So later we would find out there were all these like 9 different city departments, all these cops. I mean, they probably spent their whole budget. Like, thank God this was in an era before all the like military gear got to the cops, because God only knows what would have happened if that were the case. It happened to be a night when nobody had even like a big bag of dope that they found or anything. I think we might have had a keg, but we weren't really selling it. The only thing at the end of the day that they did was charge us with operating a business without a license, because we were charging at the door. That was the only thing they could come up with. But they completely fucked up our lives, because we were broke people who were going from paycheck to paycheck and whatever. And I mean, in the big picture, we all had larger safety nets, so everybody was okay. But there's that tension, and so I came here a few years after that. I got here in '95, and I came in a very kind of punk rock context. Most of the people I knew out here were punks. I moved into the East Bay initially, but what I remember hearing was that the straight edge punks and the crusty punks don't hang out in San Francisco. It's like it's and I eventually realized that what happens is, everybody, whether they're the punks or the filmmakers, the sculptors, whatever, people come here from wherever. San Francisco is like this beacon that brings, and the Bay Area more broadly, lots of people come out here, and then they actually have this interesting critical mass of people that are doing what they're doing, so they can kind of explore identity in a different way. This is my theory anyway, and as with all of this stuff, I'm happy to hear if you've got different information or other perspectives later, because like I said, I'm trying to open up conversations and questions here. Yeah, my joke is that the queer Latina performance artists don't hang out with the straight Latina performance artists, because they've got enough people to go to their shows, so they have a critical mass, and they can explore identity. I think that's one of the key things, is like, in a way, I don't have to just have a shelter to even be alive. We can actually play around with if we ran the world, because we have enough people for that. So in a way, that's how I've started thinking about Burning Man, especially early on when I got out here. I think Burning Man, maybe you've heard, is a little bit different now, but in 1995, 1996, so the thing that I like to think about with this stuff, even about, finding out about this event tonight, or finding out about events happening here at Space in general. Scott is, as all of us event producers are, limited a bit by the fact that the main channel people find out about things is social media. Facebook in particular is a really powerful way to communicate with people. It's also a really powerful way to never get heard about. If there are blind spots, and if maybe you're not running the ads, or maybe you're not sure you want to commit all that information to a platform that, these days gets used in divorce proceedings and other types of lawsuits. So, in the 90s, there were like 4 journalists that would cover. There's Silka Tudor, there was Summer. Eventually, there was Jeff Stark was out here before he moved to New York, and he wrote for the Weekly and the Guardian. And there was a place in San Jose, and one of the wonderful 90s venues was called the Wearpad. Give a round of applause if you remember the Wearpad. Huh? That's right. This is the zombie Wearpad. It's come back from the dead on Easter. But the Wearpad, I think that one of their sort of, I don't know if it was their actual demise, but one of the big problems they sort of ran into was when they got a little bit of publicity in the San Jose, I forget what it was called, but it was like the San Jose Bay Area Free magazines, like magazine paper. If you are living on the edge, and some detail about how you run your stuff, like the fact that people live here, or the fact that you had, amplified music or whatever, you are on the border, then, marketing can quickly turn into an Achilles heel, and you get into trouble. And why did I start saying that? Because the downfall of the Wearpad. Well, so the Facebook thing. So blah, 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 blah. I don't know. I lost the train for a second, but it gives me a chance to say, these are there's a serial entrepreneur is a horrible little term that we all know now. But what Scott, what are you? You are a serial something. You are a serial instigator. You are a serial. Yeah. And thank you for sharing your problems. A serial janitor for the arts. And so Scott, and I'm going to have Scott come up here in just a little bit, and we're going to talk about the fact that he has these long-term relationships with these warehouse spaces. So he's been with this one for 15 years. Yeah, where were you 5 years ago? No, I'm just kidding. That's me too. Um, and and before that, Scott was one of the people who co-founded Cell Space. So, you've ever been to Cell Space? Um, um, yeah, good janitor work. And and Scott and I sat down and talked a lot about this very interesting history that Cell Space had, which was that it was founded, initially by some people who, as often happens, they had a living space that was kind of a legit living space, and it's like, oh, what's that unused industrial space that's right over this thing? Really, is no one using that? Huh, that's interesting. How much a square foot is it? Really? Oh, well. And as Scott told me, he wanted to run a film night. And I think you still haven't ever run your actual own film night because you just keep facilitating everybody else making art. Decades later, how long did Cell Space run? I think you were in at the beginning and then kind of again at the end. But yeah, that involves math at that point. But you heard 94 to what, 2012? So. Um, so we're in 2027 now, or no? You somehow were doing, but or you? I guess you had moved on to start this place before it was over. Um, yeah. At any rate, the reason that comes to mind with the WearPad is that Scott, who's one of the WearPad guys, did the Vortex Room, another come and gone kind of space. There are other kinds of spaces that happen. We've had the Odeon happen, which was Chicken John's bar. Chicken John had a shop before that. There's another place called the Hush Hush, which was a bar that was very associated with this scene and gave opportunities for musicians and artists to do things in there. There's something about creating the occasion and enabling a space for arts to happen. And sometimes we can do it driving between the lines, and sometimes we need to do it outside. Is it because the stuff is different? Is it because the stuff is more dangerous? NIMBY has just gone away. We just heard Michael Christian's warehouse has gone away. Some of you are going to know some of these places that more than others, but I did a show at a space called 21 Grand that's also no longer around. 21 Grand was really interesting because it started off at 21 Grand Street in downtown Oakland before anything else was in downtown Oakland. It's now like a very hip bar in that location. They proceeded to have, I think, 4 different locations that were within 2 blocks of that and kept their name as 21 Grand, even though it was no longer their address. But they always found a way, including that they shared space with our friend Kimrick's accordion repair shop. Those are not 3 words that most people get to say in a row. So enjoy that and practice that. So yeah, I think the accordion repair shop still exists somehow, but in various ways, they were able to kind of keep going, keep a space for the arts. So it's a question of like, how much risk do you take on, or do you play within do you take on the other burdens of filling out the paperwork, dealing with the inspections, and a different type of attention, and a different type of being a target, as opposed to being something that's in a more cast out area, because artists have this way, and this is where we bump into that G word, the gentrification thing. But the history is that artists and other people that don't have a lot of money will go to the most dangerous and often the most poisonous places. So Hunters Point had lots of great spaces and had a lot of poison in the ground, and a lot of that's a pattern that happens over and over again. No one else wants this. Well, then once it gets built up and once culture gets created there, suddenly everybody wants to be there. New York has this interesting pattern where places like Soho, places like Lower East Side, places like the Meatpacking District, Brooklyn, well, and I mean, Brooklyn's fascinating because it's like Oakland. It's so big and it has all these smaller sort of regions amongst them. But it's like a low pressure thing. It's like the way that water finds its level. The artists, the creative people, and sometimes also the criminals and the drug dealers, whatever, and many times, often all the same, are finding their way to those levels where the economic pressure is less, and they start to build something up, and then it changes, and a different level of attention happens, and a different change happens. So I want to start wrapping up my portion of this, and I want to ask you all. I've just touched on a few of the spaces around here. Years ago, I had done another event where I made a giant list of all the venues that I had heard of in the area, most of which were gone. And this was probably 12 years ago, so a lot of others have come. I wasn't able to find that original list. I was hoping I would have that so I could show it to you, and you would hear names like, 848 Community Space and all these other things that had come before. But I want to, in this sense of sharing this night with you, and hopefully that some of this is stirring up some ideas or some thoughts. If there's another space that hasn't gotten mentioned, or even one that has, if anybody wants to come up and say something about it briefly, I've got this other mic here, and I want you to think about that. I'm going to open that up for you in just a minute. So have that in mind. And to kind of come to an end on my part, when I got out here, and I've talked to a few other people about this, one of the most powerful things to me was, and I got out here, in my early 20s, and there's some of the folks I'm talking about are in this room right now, but I remember seeing these people who were adults, who were older than me, and they were still doing this stuff. They were still making art. They were still living in warehouses, hanging out in warehouses, making things happen. They were still drawing cartoons, being funny. They were, they like me had their challenges economically and otherwise, but I was like, this can be a life. And to have that example and to see the community functioning, it led me to what I think is probably the biggest insight that I've had. I think about life in general, and certainly about living a creative life and arts and community. And it's that the intergenerational thing is incredibly important. That the energy of younger artists coming now, and I don't want to shock you, I'm no longer a younger artist. Very upsetting. But I think if I want to leave you with something, besides just the questions and so forth, think about the fact of how important the intergenerational thing is. And if you are on the older side of that spectrum, make sure that you keep score a little bit, and make sure that you know some folks that are younger, that you're sharing lessons that you've learned, that you're hearing what is happening now that may have a different edge that is applicable or parallel to some of the edges that first got you excited about these things, and vice versa. It's important, honestly. The old man stories, I know, okay, but there's wisdom in some of these things that have come before. There's an importance of making sure we don't make the same mistakes again. There's a line, I can't remember who it is now who's got it as their sig file, but it's like, always make new mistakes. Find new mistakes, find more brilliant mistakes, and make them with a good reason. What cultures are the Western culture, American culture. We pile on a lot of self-congratulatory stuff, whether it's the technology that we use or the elitism, other elitisms that we carry. If we look at cultures that just function well for the people that are in them, you know, you tend to see an intergenerational piece. You tend to see kids hanging out with grandparents, and you tend to see, you know, a kind of family thing. We break from our families. We don't tend to live in the towns that we grew up in, et cetera. And I know that I've found here a kind of family. It's the chosen family. That's one of those lines they use for it. But it's important to remember that you know, it is our friends, but it's more than our friends, and it is just having fun and making stuff, but it's also more than that. The life stuff, the culture stuff, that's what I like to think in terms of is making culture. And part of it is a culture that sustains me in strange spaces that are not well coded and that may very well be illegal and gone next week. So I think I'll leave my part there. I really want to thank you guys for being here. If you would like to say something, please come up. And then after, if a few people want to say something, we're going to have Scott come up, and Scott's going to tell us something really exciting about the future and find out if you believe. Thank you.